here in a small community that I know as White Lake, and I'm situated on the traditional and unceded territories of the Secwepemc people, where we still have snow on the ground actually, and White Lake, which we're next to, is still frozen over. We've got bets going about when that ice will break up. And so while we're gathering today in many different places, the work that's bringing us together takes place on the traditional and unceded territories of the Syilx and Secwepemc people. And that's the work that we're doing with the University of British Columbia Okanagan campus, UBCO. I was thinking about this weekend, there was a food event in Armstrong just about how food is a powerful connector and how our Indigenous communities know that food is a powerful connector, and have demonstrated that beautifully and holistically through their traditions and practices and care for the land. So it seems important to begin a conversation like this with gratitude for the original stewards of the foodlands and the waterways here. And with that, just a warm welcome to everyone who's joining us, to our panelists who are spending time with us today to answer some of our burning questions. We've got some project partners joining us, as well as guests, our participants. I think it remains hard to show up to Zoom, I think, with everything that's going on, and maybe with the distraction of some nicer weather. So we really appreciate your time today. As I mentioned, I'm Liz Blakeway, the Network Director for Land to Table, and we're a regional food system network, so a nonprofit organization that's based in the North Okanagan. So we're working here to build a network of food system folks and undertake projects that work to build our local food economy, increase access to local food, create opportunities to build a more resilient and relocalized food system, and start to decolonize our food system as well. I'll take us through the next 2-ish hours together. We might try and close up a little bit early, but we'll see how we go. And then I'm here with my Land Table team. So that includes Renoir, and she's going to help with tech support. If you have any issues, please let Renoir know, and she'll take some notes for us as well. And then Mary Stockdale, who's part of our Land Table board, and with ICER, who is one of the project partners with the UBCO project, is here as well. You want to give a wave, Mary, so folks can see you? There you go. So we will be recording the session today. We've already started that. If that feels uncomfortable, please feel free to turn your cameras off. And this conversation is our second learning circle in a series of 3 that we're hosting. The first session focused on institutional perspectives around local food procurement at institutions. These discussions are a culmination of a year-long pilot project that Land to Table has been doing in partnership with UBC Okanagan and the Institute for Community Engaged Research, where the aim is really to increase local food procurement from small to medium-sized farms to food services at UBCO. And this dialogue series is funded through a Vancouver Foundation grant. So the focus today for the 2-ish hours that we have together isn't on us and what we've accomplished through the UBCO pilot project, but rather to learn from others who are doing aggregation and distribution through a hub or through a business. And this is to seed ideas for opportunities in our region and to help inform some next steps that we're going to take this next year when we do year 2 of this pilot project with UBCO. So today we've specifically invited a range of aggregators, distributors, or hubs who are both for-profit and nonprofit in various stages of operation, and who are serving farmers and institutions to various degrees in unique ways. And we believe that we have a lot to learn from others, and we understand that many others are interested in learning as well. So each of our panelists today kind of represents an interesting hook that made us want to connect and learn more from them. Food hubs seem to be an important part of relocalizing our food system. I know that that word can mean a million different things depending on where you are. For us today, hubs have that aggregation distribution element for smaller scale farmers is what we're aiming for. Okay, so we're going to start with a round of introductions from our 3 panelists, as well as from our farmer aggregator, who's been a part of the pilot project at UBCO. And then we're going to move into a Q&A session. And this is really going to be all of our time together. We're structuring this a little bit different from our first session in that we've got some main questions for our panelists. And after they each respond to that question in about 3 minutes each, we'll open that up to our audience to ask questions. So anything that comes up or that you want clarification on based on what they've asked. And that's, we've got to say goodbye to folks a little bit earlier than noon. So that's just to make sure that we all get a chance to ask our questions. And then before we close, we'll hear from Stacy at Feedbc. I think Feedbc has a couple of exciting announcements, and they're doing a lot of great programming to support institutional local food procurement. And then we'll close with just a quick summary of what's standing out for folks from our conversation. Before we dive in, I just wanted to share a couple quick rules of engagement here. I think it goes without saying these days, but I'm going to say it anyway. We ask that folks listen and share with curiosity rather than judgment. Take care of yourself. If you need to turn the camera off, get water, stand up, stretch, leave for a bio break, just go for it. And then we'll make space and take space in that everyone gets a chance to speak. Okay, have I forgotten anything? Any questions? Okay, so Renoir is gonna spotlight our panelists, including Emily. Emily, I know that your connectivity isn't great. Is it possible to turn your camera on just for the introductions, and we'll see how we go?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, and then we can spotlight you as well, if you don't mind. Okay, so we'll begin with Emily. As I mentioned, she's been her and Owen, her partner Owen, have been our farmer aggregator for the UBCO pilot project. So Emily is the main farmer at Enderberry Farm, and they're aggregating product through Shuswap Organics, which is another business. So happy to hear a little bit from you about the project we've been working on to kind of provide a bit of context for why we're here in a sense.
Great.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. If I start to pause because of my poor internet connection, I'll just turn my video off. Very excited to be here. Thanks so much for including me. I'll give you a little bit of an idea of our farming model and how we've been operating, and then talk a bit about UBCO and just the opportunities that working with institutions provides to small farmers like us. So I started farming here in the North Okanagan about 7 years ago on a very small scale. I think our first year was maybe 1/4 of an acre. And slowly that grew over a few years. And then 3 years ago, both my husband, Owen, and I became full-time farmers. And we were at about 2 acres at that point. This year, we'll be growing on 4 acres, and we hope within the next few years to be growing anywhere between 6 and 8 acres. When we started out, or when I started out, Owen was working off farm full time and I was working off farm part time. And we were mostly selling at farmers markets. And my general takeaway from doing farmers markets for a number of years was that the market was pretty saturated in this area. We don't have a huge population base, and we have some really committed farmers market customers. But as a new farmer entering into the farmers markets, it just felt like it was really hard to make a living just with farmers markets income. So over the last 2 or 3 years, we've really focused on building more wholesale clientele into our business, which has made our the financial side of our business a lot more resilient compared to when we were just doing farmers markets. And that isn't necessarily how I thought it would work out when I became a small farmer. I was like, direct to customers, farmers markets, it's going to be great. I'll have a personal relationship with the people that we're selling our food to. But in reality, growing for grocery stores and restaurants and institutions has become a much more stable customer base. So that's sort of where our farm is at. We grow on our home farm just under an acre, and most of our farm is actually farmed on leased land, which is flatter, and we're able to use cultivating tractors to a much better degree and some harvesting equipment, which would be a lot more challenging to use on our home farm because it's quite hilly. And that's our growth and where we're choosing to sell our food and what kind of crops we're choosing to put in the ground. So I think that's probably enough just about Shuswap Organics and what we're up to. UBCO has been fantastic to work with in this partnership. My husband, Owen, isn't here today, and he's the one who has really been working directly with UBCO. So I'll tell you as much as I can. When Land to Table identified that UBCO was looking to increase their local food procurement and we started working with this pilot project. UBCO chef was able to identify storage crops that were available that they were looking for that we could potentially source locally during the September to April timeframe, and approximate volumes that they would be looking for on a season-wide and weekly basis. And then we were able to take that and think about what we were growing that could meet that demand, and then where there would be shortfalls where we could source from other local farms. And then we went and talked to those farmers and started to work things out. So the aggregation model has been that we, like if we're short on red potatoes, for example, we know which farmers locally have red potatoes. We just go buy in bulk from them, store it at our farm, and then distribute out from there. It's been real. I get quite caught up in the logistics of how everything works. And I've really appreciated that we've been able to start out this aggregation process during the winter months where pretty much all of the crops are storage crops. So when we're purchasing from another farm, even if we over purchase for that week, it's okay because we could just store it and sell it next week. Whereas in the summertime, if we were trying to do aggregation, it's more logistically challenging to line up ordering deadlines from your customers and ordering from other farms to meet those needs. UBC has been really responsive and fantastic to work with. Their facilities for unloading and delivering produce are fantastic. All their receivers know what's going on. Which is important for us because we're using Rubbermaid bins to reduce packaging waste. So there's an exchange of full bins with this week's order, and then we get last week's bins back clean. So all of that has worked really well, and everyone at UBCO sort of knows what's going on and is able to help make that happen when we arrive to do deliveries. And what else? I think although that initial snapshot of what vegetables and how much quantity the chef developed when we first started this process hasn't it ended up not being exactly what happened. We probably sold the same total volume of food, but not necessarily crop by crop. It worked out really well anyways, because there was such good communication. With UBCO, they're very responsive in, yeah, just keeping communication open with us, which has been really valuable. And then just my few thoughts on the opportunity that institutions present to small farmers is that, you know, when we were at farmers markets, it just felt like there was a pie, and, you know, every new entrant, we were just making everyone's pie slices smaller, and that doesn't help anybody. And I've sort of kept asking the question, well, like, how do we just make the pie bigger? And institutions, I think, are a fantastic way for the pie to just get bigger for our regional farmers. And I think there has been a lot of value, and I hope to continue to see a lot of value in having aggregation happen to keep logistics streamlined, so it works well for UBCO and doesn't become like administratively a burden to have lots and lots of small deliveries coming in all the time versus sort of one streamlined delivery once or twice a week. I think I'll wrap it up there unless there's anything I've left out, Liz, that you...
No, that's a great summary. Yeah, thank you so much. And I think that that's a great point, that this work really is about trying to grow that pie. And I think probably each of our panelists here can speak to that as well. So we'll move right along to our panelists to introduce yourselves, and I'll put this question in the chat here just to kick us off for some context. So who you are, so your business, your organization, and location. And we'd love to hear a little bit about your story of how your particular business or hub came to operate as it is, or will operate. Wolfgang, why don't we start with you, if that's all right? And welcome.
Yes, Wolfgang Fenning is my name. The business is Fenning's Organic Vegetables. I farm here with my brother together, and his wife and my wife and our kids, who some of them already work full-time on the farm. We are about an hour west of Toronto. I grew up in Germany. I came to Canada when I was 18 with my parents together, who were organic farmers there, driven out by a highway project. And we started farming here and started going to the farmers market. And the same as the previous story here, you can't make a living on the farmers market. At least back in those days, we couldn't. So I thought I'll go to Toronto and see who wants food there. And then we started with a few stores, and we still service most of them today, like Big Carrot and some of the well-known businesses. We service them now 3 times a week. So it started with same thing, like 10, 15 acres of vegetables. And today we farm a total of 700 acres. About 500 in vegetables. We employ in the summer up to 150 people. We service 200 stores about per week with our trucks. We have 5 trucks that we do deliveries. Back in the day when I first went to Toronto, a lot of people didn't like the city, and I always did. So a lot of farmers came and said, hey, you go to Toronto, can you take my stuff? That's basically as simple as the conversation was. So we took their things, and that was the beginning of Fenning's becoming a wholesaler and a storage facility and a packing facility. So we set up packing lines for potatoes and onions and beets, and a separate project for carrots and parsnip. So we are a very large carrot grower. We sell to the most supermarkets, Sobeys, Metro, like whoever there is, we supply those warehouses. but we also keep delivering to the small health food stores and general stores in the Toronto area. The reason why I was asked to come onto this was because of institutional buying. I believe it was about between 5 and 10 years ago where the Toronto University started a project where they wanted organic food in the system. We've had a number of experiences with that over the years, but what we find, they always die out again. There are contracts in place with an existing supplier. That existing supplier is being told he should now do organic. It's just like when Loblaws goes to their conventional farmers and says, look, if you want to keep the relationship with us, you need to do organic, which is the case with most supermarkets and most growers across North America. And if a conventional grower is being told to do organic to hold the relationship, then he's not a happy organic grower because he's being told to do it. He not necessarily wants to do it. And so this was the case with the suppliers. And because of contracts, they couldn't directly buy from us. We would so much like to get into direct contact with a chef or with something, but when the supply contracts are in place, then we need to work with somebody who doesn't like to work with us. And those relationships never go very far. And it all petered out. Right now, we have nobody doing any of that type of work. And I don't think that work can be successful unless they give it some freedom and let the chefs and the suppliers find each other. So that's a very short version of life experience.
That's a really good point. We are really lucky to be working with UBCO, who does not have a contracted service provider. So UBCO has control of their food services, and we are able to work directly with their chef. And it seems like that's a really lucky position that UBCO has created for us and local farmers to be in this case. So yeah, really good point. Thanks, Wolfgang. And yeah, thanks.
Ontario, close to Toronto, is a blessing and a curse. The reason for that is Toronto is the second largest produce wholesale market or has the second largest produce wholesale market set up in North America, the Toronto Food Terminal. And it's a wonderful place for US production to just go in large volume, take trucks. And so anything in the terminal in Toronto is very cheap. And whoever you want to sell to, they always tell us, oh, we can buy it cheaper at the terminal. So if you're a local grower, you are being driven into the corner by US overproduction grown with fossil water in the desert. And with that, they undercut the prices elsewhere. So most organic vegetable operations have died around here. Some cash crop grain growers may do some red beets, or another one is doing potatoes on the side, but they don't have any marketing. They sell wholesale to us, what they do, but we are almost the only operation still around, and everybody is struggling really hard with running away production costs, and we can't change our selling prices because of the US bringing product in very cheap. And so life used to be a lot more fun than it is right now.
Yeah, interesting. So there are these very big systemic barriers within the global food system that are still making it hard for local production to do well.
Yes.
Marita, I wonder if we can go to you next. You're representing a different model, trying to support these local small scale farmers in face of these big systemic global food system issues in a different kind of way.
Yeah, very different way. And thank you, Liz. It's so nice to be here. Really good to hear too from Wolfgang and Emily about their work. So just as by way of introduction, my name is Marita Prado. I'm the Executive Director of Lush Valley Food Action Society. And my feet are touching the ground in the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. And of course, doing food systems work for us and in an organization such as Lush Valley, we're really want to be connected to our Indigenous community here. The word Comox actually means land of plenty. So we know that the soils and the lands around us have been stewarded for time immemorial by people here. And I feel fortunate to live and work here. So Lush Valley, very different situation. Lush Valley is a charitable nonprofit. So our vision is healthy local food at the heart of community well-being. I am in my room today. I'm not in our building because I've been sick, but behind us is kind of a banner and our poster there. So I'll tell you a little bit about our story because it is a very different story. So in 2019, I co-authored a on-the-ground research project with the then coordinator of our Coalition to End Homelessness. And what we wanted to, so we kind of had 3 different groups of people that we were in discussion with. We had local farmers that we were having a discussion with. We had people that were working in housing, specifically low income, supportive and transitional housing, and then people that were having lived experience of food insecurity. So not having consistent access to healthy food. And what we really wanted to look at was, is there a way to close the loop? So where we're seeing that farmers don't have a consistent, marketplace for their produce, or they're having to do these, like, as you've been talking about, farmers markets rather than some sort of solid market. And on the other side, we've got people living dealing with housing and food insecurity. And is there a way to close that loop and take a food systems solution to the food systems problem? So on the one hand, obviously dealing with issues around the local food market. On the other hand, dealing with issues of food insecurity. So what came out of that report in terms of recommendations was some opportunities to fill the gap. So we did, and the biggest opportunity that we saw was a good food box program as one way to do that. So the nice thing, and I'll probably keep talking about the good food box, is that it's quite flexible. So when you're looking at aggregation and distribution, we could buy from local farmers, we could buy when there was a glut in the season of a certain product, and we could put it in a box and we could deliver those boxes out to people. So following the 2019 report, in 2020, there was another report. So Ministry of Ag came in and we had a steering committee that came together and looked at how we could get more local food into K-12 schools. So on that steering committee, there were principals and farmers and people that run different projects. There was an agrologist, and Ministry of Ag was trying to look at these different models. So the recommendation that came out of that that report was for Lush Valley to become a brokerage organization. So similar idea. Could we be kind of the middle person that held the relationships with the farmers, held the relationships with the schools, and helped to flow the local food through to the schools? Unfortunately, with that report coming out in March 2020, or finishing in March 2020, it kind of died. So we have these recommendations that were sitting there, but we weren't able to present those to Ministry of Ag because of the pandemic. But what we were able to do is kind of take that model forward. And so, so we've been able to create our own sort of small scale aggregation and distribution hub. In October of 2021, we were able to purchase a building. Now, the thing that's different about the model that we have, because it's a nonprofit model, we have all these different revenue streams. So the idea was, we know that the charitable sector has food programs. We know that schools have food programs. If they put their food budget towards, if there was an easy way for them to purchase local and we could help them do that, could they put their food budgets towards, purchasing local through our hub instead of, going to Costco or wherever. So we've had success, but it's been limited. And I think when we get into some of the other questions, I'll have an opportunity just to talk about what the financial barriers have been and the other barriers. We can't always purchase local if we want to be consistent with the school program that we're running. So we're running a healthy student meal program with 18 schools across the region. And we run that weekly. So we don't have local supply. So we can't always be purchasing local. So there is, that's one of the challenges, is that we do local as we can whenever we can, but sometimes we have to fill the gap with other produce.
Mhm.
So that's one. And then financially, again, like the model the advantage that we have of being a nonprofit is that we can write grants, we can fundraise, and we can have social enterprise elements, as long as those social enterprise elements are still working towards our charitable mission.
Mhm.
So it's a model that's requiring different, it does require grant revenues, it does require fundraising, it does require all of these things in order to exist. But I choose to look at that as a bit of a strength of the model. So we're able to, because we're reaching our mission, and we're also helping other charitable organizations reach their mission and visions, that we have to continue to diversify. So when the grant funds are doing this, we can try to stable it out through social enterprise. So, I don't know that we even necessarily call ourselves an aggregation. Like, we are a very small aggregation and distribution hub. I think we have a unique opportunity, and I think we're uniquely positioned in our community. I will say also that Ministry of Ag, this is, the word hub is a funny word. I don't know if any of you are Baroness von Sketch fans, but they have a skit where they've created this whole building and they just keep calling everything, well, why don't we call that a hub? And why don't we call that a hub? And why don't we call that a hub? And they circle it, okay, it's the hub. So that word gets tossed around a bit. And in our community last year, there was a regional food hub feasibility study. And so that food hub feasibility study, we're not really sure how our smaller community hub is going to fit into their bigger hub. That has yet to be determined, because that's more of, they're looking at it as more of probably a food processing hub. So it'll be interesting to see that. But the building that we have just purchased, our next phase is going to be to put a kitchen in. So the other thing, and maybe I'll mention it later, but is that we can vertically, what we talk about is vertically integrating different programs. So if we buy produce, we can't use all of it for our Good Food Box or our Healthy Student Meal program or our salad bar programs, which we're also supporting, then it can go to our hot meal program. We could do some processing of that. So we're also looking at ways to just vertically integrate the programming. So I'll stop there.
I think we'll have to have you back once that other hub is going, and you can tell us about how they do or don't integrate. But I think I changed up the flow here because I think we do have very different models. And I think what David's going to share is another example yet again of how maybe community-owned hub can also connect with some private enterprise infrastructure to help support food systems work. So David, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. And yeah, I was just going to say, great job picking panelists, because yeah, it's quite a unique combination. So great to fit in with Wolfgang and Marita. Yeah, I wear a few different hats. So I'm mostly here to talk about my work with the Columbia Valley Moot Feed Hub. But just going back a bit, food's kind of been my main vocation for about 15 years now, starting in Ontario, near where Wolfgang actually is. So as a bit of local food activism and academic work in London, and a bit of work also in the nonprofit sector, running a local food skills program there, before I headed out to Victoria, where I did a bit of entrepreneurship in catering and packaged food meals and products, and had a kombucha company in Victoria for a few years. and have now switched gears a bit. Have been in Cranbrook currently now. So I'm currently at a place called Clear Sky Center. We're a meditation center, spiritual community out in the mountains at the east edge of the province. Currently on the unceded lands of the Tanaha people, who did a great job taking care of it for about 10 millennia before the ranchers came and overgrazed the heck out of it. And we're now doing our best to get it back to a resilient grasslands ecosystem, and curious how food plays into that. One thing that I quickly realized in our entrepreneurial work was that trying to sell the quality of food I wanted to, or organic, local, fair trade, from scratch, sprouted, all these kinds of what I think are just normal good ways to cook food. There isn't really the market capacity to buy that in the East Kootenays at the moment. So figuring out how to start with who's here and what kind of ethical, sustainable foods there is demand for, and then constantly raising the bar. So I'm really lucky living at Clear Sky, where we are also a charity and have funding and a strong community of residents, where we can incubate a very sustainable kitchen. I like to think of us as kind of the most local organic kitchen in the East Kootenays. And just kind of included today, we're kind of a micro institution here as well. We don't buy about $100,000 of food a year, so we're at the small end, but it's kind of a mini hub in a way. So I hadn't started thinking about us that way until today. And then also bringing my background in school as an engineering, and now bringing that into kind of food systems, I would say, and doing a lot of work with a company called Farm Food Drink. Used to be out of Nanaimo, but now remote, mostly in the coast, and also myself in the Kootenays. We do business planning, marketing, branding, and market research exclusively for small farm, food, and drink businesses across BC and local food organizations. So the past, I think almost 4 years now, we've been working with food hubs across, in particular, the Kootenays, but also in the coastal region. A lot of work with Columbia Basin Trust, and most recently with Feedbc, which is supporting the current project in Columbia Valley. So we, I guess in about 2018-19, did a full study on the Kootenay region on the kind of food hub networks that would be feasible, and identified Nelson, Creston, and Invermere as the top candidates for food hub physical infrastructure and aggregation, or something that could be called a hub. Creston has gone forward and is in process of implementing what we hope will be quite a strong hub. Nelson is going forward with a very community food service approach, and a lot of food sovereignty work there and up through the Slocan Valley, which is fantastic. And the past, I guess, year now, working with both Feedbc and Columbia Basin Trust, have developed an institutional pilot project and a business plan for a meat and food hub. So the Invermere region is very focused on beef. It's probably 95 to 99% of what grows in the Columbia Valley Invermere area by both dollars and pounds. But there is a very strong growing community of food processors and some vegetable growers who are very keen to collaborate now with ranchers and shift that system a bit. So it was very quickly identified that any food hub in the Invermere area would need to have beef as its cornerstone. So we developed a plan for a food hub leveraging beef, and particularly the planning for beef sales to institutions across interior BC. So a strong focus on post-secondary colleges and universities, looking at penetrating the healthcare market as well, which has some hurdles, and how that can become a strong partnership between the ranchers and the other producers, and as well between all the producers, institutions, and then bringing in local restaurants and other purchasers to collectively create a strong food systems network. Yeah, that's the short version.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I think I'm loving the unique perspectives and who you're serving, how you're serving, why you're serving, and we're going to dig into that a little bit more in the questions. But thank you all for that context. We've got 4 main questions here. So just in terms, oops, there we go. There we go. Sorry, I thought I was muted for a second. So we've got 4 main questions. We'll give each of you about 3 minutes to respond. If you can keep them tight, that would be great. And then we're going to open each question up to our audience to see what's coming up for you, what clarifying questions or details you want to ask about for each. And the first one is under the theme of values. And one of the conversations that we've been having over the last year with UBC Okanagan and our farmers is what are the values that guide local food purchasing that go beyond the geographic proximity to the campus? So these might include the reasons around why we want to invest in local food and why we want to create or how we're going to create buy-in for the on-campus community around local food. So these might include, ethical, just, and sustainable food products, food production practices. And so the first question, oops, Noor got it in there just before me. The first question that we have for you is asking that you describe the values that shape your, what we're calling aggregation distribution model, and how you ensure the right fit with your growers to the end market, and then manage and or fulfill those values when you're working with multiple suppliers. But those could be the values that shape your model, or the values that also shape who is involved and why and how. Does anyone? I'm happy for someone to just jump right in.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm trying to figure out what the word value means in this, because
Yeah.
in the produce world, it's a very strong elbow world, and they always ask, why are you doing it? Is that what you're asking us?
Yeah. If that's how it's landing, that's what I'm asking. Why?
Not that I like the word why, but it's very pragmatic and very clear.
Yeah.
And gets to the point. Why are you, what's motivating you, basically?
That's right. Yeah.
Where's the motivation coming from?
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be great. What is the motivation? Where is it coming from? Why are you doing what you're doing? How you're doing it?
I was born and raised that with, I guess now I've used the word values that was put in front of us kids back then. You do things that not necessarily serve you first. Community comes first, family comes first. The farm, the land, you're stewards of the land, you're looking after all these things. So I kind of grew up in a world always doing things for other reasons than my own. That comes second. And so I grew up on an organic farm, looking after the land, looking after the customers, looking after the employees if they have a problem, always looking after somebody. And that's what motivated us to go to Toronto to sort of make this work. I'm happy that way. But in the end, the other industries elbow themselves through the world, always asking what's in it for me first. And if they don't like it, they don't move. And that whole thing brought the economic end of a business, for example, like ours, to a very vulnerable spot, because we're selling the carrots for almost the same price as 20 years ago. And where was the cost of production 20 years ago and now? The only way to survive this was we did what Loblaws told us when we supplied them, and they said, you have to drive cost out of your system. So instead of looking after ourselves and after everybody, we walk around trying to figure out where can you cut a dollar, drive cost out of the system. It was a good lesson. It was good to do. It's amazing how much you can squeeze out of a lemon after it's been squeezed already for many years. And there's still a drop in it, but at some point it's dry. And we are at the point where the lemon is dry. And we can't, wages are killing us. Fuel is killing. Everything is getting to the point where where the family is no longer excited about this. So, and yet we have to be motivated and move on because the world had tough times before, and we worked ourselves through it, not necessarily having the solution right away, but the confidence of we'll come up to a solution is good, but it's hard. Again, you need to motivate a lot of skeptical people in the business. So yeah, you talk values, I'd talk philosophy. Going out to produce people, and usually whoever you go to, they're all struggling on their own and themselves, so there isn't a lot of buffer to help out. I don't know if that answered your question or
Yeah,
brought up the reality on the table.
yeah, and that's absolutely fair, because we're trying to ensure that there is buy-in for local food that costs more in a global food system. And so the values have to be able to stand on their own in a way. And I think, Wolfgang, these are some of the things we're going to get into in our last Learning Circle session around these systemic barriers. But you mentioned a really important one at the top, which is you as organic farmers are stewards of the land. And I think that is a really important value that we need to pay for. David or Marita, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, and thanks, Wolfgang. Like, I really appreciate you talking about what, because I like the reframe of why we do what we do. And when I come back to thinking about why we do what we do, is we want to make it easier. We want to make it easier on our farmers. We know the pressures that farmers have, particularly new entrants into farming. So we want to make it easier for farmers. And so as a, you know, again, the advantage of being a charitable nonprofit is that we can offer, so we do things like we have a farm gleaning program, which is not straight up gleaning. It's not straight up going to a farm and taking something, but it's an exchange of labor for excess produce that can't be sold on the market that we can then either distribute or put into a hot meal program. So we do that. As I said, we purchase gluts. So the Good Food Box is really great because people aren't ordering specific products. The product is the Good Food Box. So we're able to put whatever's in season into those boxes. So when gluts hit, local gluts, and everybody's got beans and it's going to drive the price down, we're able to purchase those at a fair cost. And we're also, my food access manager, James, is on vacation before things get really busy. And so he would be better to describe this. But one of the things that, a way that we support farmers is that people can text James and say, we've got a glut of this, and we'll figure out a way to get it picked up and brought to our center, or brought to one of our mobile cooler units, of which we have 2. So we also do post-market pickup. So those folks that are at the farmers market, we do a post-market pickup where we go and we purchase what they haven't sold at the market, if there's anything in excess, to try to support them. So really the value there continues to be, how do we support small and medium scale, specifically Comox Valley farmers? And the larger value or vision is that we want to create a resilient local food system for the Comox Valley. So we know we're dealing with floods and we're dealing with all of these different emergencies, and we've seen what farms survive these sort of disasters. We've seen where food security is not even considered an emergency. So how do we create a more resilient community, which is really at the basis of, the whole community. That's why we want to do this. The other piece is making it, and I just keep coming back to, we want to make it easier. We want to make it easier for farmers. We want to make it easier for charitable organizations that maybe they want to buy local, or they want to have more healthy menus or whatever, but it's like daunting to figure out the relationship with the farmer and where do I go for this? And they're just going to do whatever's easiest. So we want to be able to be a somewhere that people can just, hey, we're going to help you get this local food to the people that you're serving, or the people that are living in social housing, or help with these programs. So really the value is about making it easy for other organizations that are dealing with food insecurity, or students from K to 12 to purchase local, or even sometimes it's not local, but will help just with some consistency, so that when the local food comes in, we can also make sure that that gets distributed. So I think, yeah, those are really the values, is like, how do we support? And I don't, again, like, it's a really big problem. So I'm not saying that this is the solution or that we've got it figured out or any of that. But that's the intention. The intention is really, how do we support the farmers and make it easier for them, easier for people to and organizations to purchase local.
Yeah, it sounds like you really center those relationships, like that is what is coming first. And creating those value chains instead of just those supply chains. David, how about you? Because you guys are in a very different place. Like, you're really just getting started. And so this question might land differently for you in terms of what has driven, and maybe that connects more to the institutional local thing, but yeah.
Yeah, actually, yeah, thanks, Liz. I'll kind of bring us in from two sides that meet in the middle. So for just briefly, for the Clear Sky side of things, we use a quadruple bottom line that we're really happy about. We like to think, we're trying to think 400 years into the future and what that's going to look like, and hopefully we intend to still be here that long. So that's economics, environmental, social, and spiritual. And we've actually shifted that, rather than talking about sustainability, to talking about generativeness. So we're not really interested in maintaining what's here. We're actively restoring things, like our grasslands ecosystem was completely distraught, and suddenly it's healthy 15 years later after a bunch of restoration work. So we're privileged to be able to think about things that way. And one of our values is to try and go for the most beautiful with the least effort. And what that looks like in terms of food is, as the kitchen manager here, we have not a huge budget, but we're about $10 to $15 a day per person. And my goal is to basically spend all of that and get the best quality I can, rather than trying to get our costs down, which is a bit of a unique perspective. And what that looks like is, our meat's the furthest we get our meat from is Creston. Most of it's about 5-10 kilometers away from a neighbor, and working with local produce growers and companies, and mixing values. And this ties in a bit to the hub as well, is that, sometimes the most local, organic, beautiful produce supplier isn't actually the right fit. We currently get our organic produce delivered to our door, which is a new service that we're really excited about. We've previously worked with other more struggling small scale growers or collections of farmers, and the logistics just weren't workable to support, having 12 different orders from 12 different places. We're 40 minutes from town. It's a challenge. So it really is bringing all four of those elements together. And we often joke, Cranbrook's, if you've been here, it's perfectly wonderful, and it's a bit behind in terms of local food. So we're trying to make Cranbrook a bit like Nelson over the next couple decades, trying to make Cranbrook cool and have a good local food scene here. And what that looks like to bring some of those values into the hub, I'll actually just read out the current vision statement for the hub, is still working, is to support and grow the collective prosperity and resiliency of the Farm Institute members and the entire Columbia Valley community of food producers, supporters, and consumers. And so some of the values that this leads to is to leverage the cattle ranching industry there to support other more micro scale producers and growers. So by leveraging beef to build infrastructure, warehousing infrastructure, then those smaller growers can take advantage of really commercial equipment that they wouldn't have access to if beef wasn't involved. Similar to a lot of the values from Lush, to increase the mutual profitability, stability, and resiliency of the whole local food system in the Columbia Valley. And it is an interesting mix, as we're talking about institutions, the overall kind of nonprofit food world up in the valley, but also ranchers, most of which are fairly traditional in their farm and economic models. So what values can we use to get all these people to benefit mutually? So some of the things we're looking with in terms of values are to reduce the impact of volatile trade and shipping. So avoid cattle going across into Alberta, where they typically go, which means low quality commercial conventional feed, poor animal welfare, poor conditions in slaughter facilities. and also just very volatile transportations, liners spilling over and causing harm to animals, all kinds of awful things, and just market instability, just prices. I'm sure you're all aware the price of beef has been, I've seen beef for $10 a pound, ground beef in the grocery stores over the last couple of years. So being able to add some stability, looking at things like perhaps fixed pricing, and to go for consistent quality and relationships, rather than just being a market player. So rather than trying to cut in at the lowest price, saying we're going to offer this quality, we're going to offer this volume, we're going to offer this price point, and we're going to hold that. And that's what this local food network can sustain. And also one of our values, thinking about what Wolfgang said about universities and their fixed pricing contracts, how can we make it easier for institutions to buy local? Some of them are a bit hamstrung. Some, like UBCO, have some independence there, but they're still usually relying on, whether it's Cisco or Gordon Food Services to bring in a good chunk of their produce. So how can we make it easy for them to choose local? Because they all want to. We did extensive interviews and they all want to, but they can't. It's difficult. The logistics, the pricing, the quality can all be very difficult. So how can we, increase the food system supply? How can we increase the market share of local food, basically, and particularly local beef, but not only beef? And how can we use institutions to get a big impact there?
You wrapped that up really nicely. Thank you. We are doing some research with a student who's Will, who's with us today as well, around the values that drive local food, that make us want to invest in local food, that allow us to sell local food in a way to the on-campus community. So I want to give the opportunity. We just have a couple minutes for a question from our participants with us. I wonder if there's a burning question from someone, or Mary or Will, if there's something coming up based on the research that you've started with regard to values. Feel free to just unmute yourself or raise your hand if you'd like.
Will, do you have a question?
No pressure.
No pressure. If you want, you can pass it back to me, but just wanted to ask.
Not right now. I'll get back to you if I have.
Okay.
Good. Yeah.
I think one of the things, Will's doing a survey asking students what they value about in food, like what values they want to see in food, like sustainability and justice, those kinds of things. But I think what a question for you, the panel, would be, when you're selecting, like entering into relationships with farmers, what kind of process do you go through? Is it based on certification, that they're certified so they're in? Is it based on their scale, like that they're small scale and local? Is it based on just the relationship and getting to know them and saying, yeah, this is someone I can work with? Just wondering kind of what you do to affirm that, this farmer belongs within my values and within my distribution system.
Yeah, thanks, Mary.
I'm happy to jump in.
Please.
So briefly on the clear sky side of things, for our center is a bit simpler for that, because it is, I think you mentioned relationship. So the relationship is the first point of contact. If we can have a conversation, then that's far more important than any kind of certification or stamp of approval. I can talk to someone and visit them and see how they raise their animals, their food. And then, as I mentioned, sometimes it's a combination of quality, values, ethics, sustainability, logistics, all coming together. So are they reliable? They couldn't have the best product, but working with them is just problematic. Like we're looking to order sprouts from Nelson, but it kind of gets shipped from here to there to here to there. And, buying some that might come from coastal BC at the local store might just be a better fit, regrettably. For the hub, partnering with ranchers, it's willingness to be innovative and think toward the future, I think would be the main goal. Mostly we're looking for ranchers who are just happy to participate. And then there needs to be a willingness to be a bit nimble or a bit adaptable. That's a bit of a more difficult sell with ranchers. There isn't a strict value in terms of, how grass-fed or how specifically the animals are raised, but we are, I'll mention this in some of the next questions, working with cull cows in particular, who are almost always grass and hay fed for their entire life and have a certain standard that way. And trusting that the ranchers are all part of a small community and typically have some similar standards there. But it is one of our ongoing challenges is to figure out exactly what criteria a rancher needs to meet for that cow and that beef to be suitable for the hub. So that's actually a question we're still exploring.
Yeah. And Wolfgang, do you work with other farmers? You work with other organic farmers, like you are farming a huge area, but then you're also working with others. Is that correct?
Yes, we buy food from different crops from about 40 other farms.
Okay. Yeah. And is there,
yeah, again?
Sorry, is there a way that you are, like, so they're all organic, but are there other things that those farmers are needing to fulfill? Is it relationship based? Is there quality control? Is there, like, how are you affirming that they're kind of meeting those values? And maybe this is going more into standards as well now.
It would be. Who we survey, we work with only organic produce. So that's strictly organic, and everybody has to be certified. We are certified by Canada GAP, which is a food safety certification. And since last year, anybody selling to us has also got to be Canada GAP certified. So that's basically all taken away from us. So there doesn't have to be a relationship, but it's got to be Canada GAP. So David talked a lot about values and relationships, and this is very nice. And I was thinking, this is interesting. We don't have to have a relationship with people to do business. I'm the social type. I rather have relationships than some of the other, but the way this industry has gone and the scale it is working on, it needs all the certifications, and then everybody needs to pay their checks, pay their bills.
Yeah.
And then, for example, onions grow very well in the prairie. So we have a relationship with a very large farm near Winnipeg in Manitoba, and we grow the early onions in Ontario because we are earlier than they are. But after that, when it gets into storage onions, we bring onions from there by full tractor trailer loads, bulk, in tote bags, and then we run them through the packing line because they are nicer onions than we grow in the summer here in the humid weather. So the way the large industry works, and again, driving cost out of the system, there are ways to do it so that, first of all, you move crops into their ideal growing region right across Canada. So we know, for example, Quebec grows better cabbage and cold crops than we in Ontario because it's so hot here. And the Maritimes grows very good fall crops because it stays above freezing for a long time. So we try to take advantage of that and let every farmer do what they're good in.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And Emily, I can see your hand up, and I know that you'll have very specific questions. But please go ahead.
I was just really curious about the GAP certification, because this is something we've talked about a lot, and we're not GAP certified, and I don't think any of the local farms that we know directly are GAP certified. How achievable was GAP certification for your farm? And when all of the other farms that you're aggregating from also had to become GAP certified, was that a barrier for them, or was it worth their while and it was easy to make that decision to become GAP certified?
GAP is not easy. We've been something similar to GAP before GAP was around, because we used to pack food for President's Choice, like the first Canada carrots, potatoes, and onions that Loblaws did on the PC. was packed by us. And Loblaws required a certification, which is comparable to the food safety certification. They want to make sure you have your washrooms, your hand washing, your gloves, your aprons. There are a million little protocols how to not contaminate the food. And for an organic farmer, that thinks backwards. But this is how it works. The meat plants have that. HACCP has that. And Canada Gap is more or less the HACCP version for vegetable farming. We have to have it. We had to tell the farmers Gap requires everybody certified, or if you don't, you can't sell to us. I mean, it's pretty tough, but I think all growers decided to become Canada Gap, even some of the Amish people that we work with. And they have a different type of gap. Since we are a wholesaler and a packer and a shipper and all of that, we fall under different gap rules than if you are an Amish farmer. So I don't know the real difference. I know there are some differences, and again, it has to do with how do you spread a problem? See, if we as a wholesaler contaminate something, we can contaminate so many more stores, so many more people. If the small farm does something, how far down the line does it go? So if you think on how to spread something, this is where the motivation comes from for Gap to make different rules for companies that have a lot more impact if they don't watch out.
Mhm.
The cost of it, I don't really know. We have a full-time compliance person on staff, so they come to me and say, look, we have a problem. You need to do this, you need to do that. I know we had to chlorinate our water. There are all these things that we need to do, and if we don't, well, then we're not in business. So they're always telling us you're not going to be in business unless you do this. So we're basically having to do a lot of things with a gun pointed at our head.
Yeah, and it speaks to the scale and who you're serving and how you're serving them. Yeah, I think I do want to move on to one more question, because I know that David is going to have to leave us shortly, and I think that you've touched on some of these pieces, and Gap could be a part of this question as well. But this is one around cost, and so we're trying to carry the themes across our learning circles from the various perspectives. And so we're curious to understand from your experience, and again, I think some of you have touched on this, what are the financial challenges of aggregation and distribution, or your hub model? And then what are some of the solutions that you found that are required for success? The other way to put this, because I know, so David is wearing two hats, but the hub hasn't exactly started yet. The other part to this question could be, how do institutional sales factor into your financial model, or a range of markets factor into your financial model? And I'll just paste that one into the chat for you. And David, maybe we can start with you, just because I know you're going to have to step away.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I've got about 15 here, so I'll
Great.
stay as long as I can.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think I can kind of hit on all two or three of these questions a little bit together in terms of pricing and institutions. And it also relates to quality, which is the other question. So one thing that's come up a lot in basically all of our local food business planning and strategy work, whether it's for a hub or a processor producer even, is concept we call blended margins. And probably everyone here, Wolfgang and Marita and Emily and everyone else does this in some way, which is basically you have some high margin products and some low margin products, and without that combination, your business just wouldn't work. So that's a big part of the hub, and the cornerstone for the meat hub, the meat part of the hub, is basically selling hamburger ground beef to institutions. That's mostly coming from cull cows. So there's that's a bit of also how we get around the quality issue at first, is the hamburger isn't graded. It needs a certain percentage of protein and fat. There's certain flavor and of course food safety requirements, but once those baselines are met, it's a little bit more versatile in terms of quality consistency. And that's basically our low margin product. So that keeps the lights on, the doors open. There's the new warehousing facility that's hopefully going to be built over the next 12 months. Will be afforded by these sales, which will basically cover cost. And the ground beef will just about meet the current market pricing for ground beef. And then over time, by having ground beef available, there's all these other cuts, and those might vary a bit depending on which rancher and which season and which cow. But some of the one step up, your roasts and your stew beef that will be great for institutions can be made available, but also your premium cuts, so steaks and strip loins and tenderloins, turning meat into jerkies and even making pâtés and other value-added products. So both for sale to consumers and also selling to restaurants immediately in the valley. A lot of them are really moving away from, Alberta AA, AAA beef, and happy to say, this is from the valley. They're not concerned that it's ungraded. Provincial beef is not graded, which is a bit of a hurdle. So it's the combination of premium cuts and value-added products that bring in a good margin, along with, bare margin cost covering ground beef and institutional sales that's the plan for how to make the hub model work. And that's similar. I didn't mention at the beginning, but we're also doing work with the Boundary Rock Creek Food Hub over this year, which is also going to have a strong meat focus. And they'll be, looking at similar challenges. One thing as well in terms of the pricing is the processing cost is quite large, and that relates a lot to quality, and skilled processors is a big issue as well. We're hoping the hub can really encourage long-term, well-trained meat processors. Our last assessment and audit looked at processors across BC and said that processing a cow could be anywhere from 2 to 12 hours, depending on who's doing it. So that, 6 times the speed and 6 times the cost. So there's a deficit of proper training there that we're working with. And the last element as well is mixing fresh and frozen. So can this size of a hub sustain fresh beef sales? The goal is to start with frozen beef and to partner with institutions who can offer a mid-scale volume. This isn't a hub that's ever going to compete directly with, Cargill and Cisco and supply hundreds of thousands of pounds, but tens of thousands of pounds annually, so that we can have, pricing contracts and sales contracts in that volume. We can have a college who's happy to take as much frozen ground beef as we can throw at them, hopefully scale to supply all their beef, and then over time, develop our own infrastructure in the valley, develop a finishing lot for cows to spend their entire lives in the valley, reduce the amount that gets shipped to Alberta, and build capacity to have fresh beef sales across the entire year. Refrigeration cost is quite huge on frozen beef, so it's actually there's a lot of different logistics and hurdles to look at here, but basically scaling over time to get those margins up and leveraging, because it's essentially non-profit or not-for-profit venture run by the local farm institute and the local chamber and economic development office. There's some capacity for grant funding and support to or low interest loans to get it off the ground, and to make it to give it that leg up, just because there's no really competing with the Cargill plant that can pump out beef for $2 a pound when we're buying it for $3 and then having it process it on top of that. So really working to leverage, on the last question, the institutional sales, to leverage institutions as that mid-scale entry point. The very micro-scale farmers, we're really happy they exist, and to support them to continue to do what they're doing, and then to reach with a different market, a bit of scale by getting these ranchers together that, we're calling it mid-scale. That's not probably the right term in the Canada sense, but, a step up from supplying to your local markets, supplying to institutions that give just enough volume that you can buy that, refrigerated van and that large cooler in that warehousing facility, without going so big that you're just not able to meet quality and local requirements.
I think it's a really exciting example, and I appreciate that you've touched on kind of all the elements of the questions here around financing, quality control, the challenges, and maybe some of the solutions that you hope to see. Again, I think we should do one of these in like a couple of years' time. and bring you each back and hear about what's changed or how things have
Yeah.
come together. Marita, I want to give you.
Sorry, if I just had one more minute.
Yeah,
That,
of course.
yeah, just
Yeah,
wanted to
yeah.
share as well. A couple of things I forgot to mention is fixed pricing contracts are something the hub will be keen to pursue. So, we'll supply ground beef at, say it's $5 a pound for the next year. The market price might be $6, it might be $4. So there could be times where they're under or over, but they can encouraging chefs and food service managers to work with that and say, okay, we're just going to count on it being $5. That lets the ranchers and the hub stay in operation, and to take that approach. And then looking for the low-hanging fruit, as we call it. So we're hoping to supply some post-secondary schools with all of their beef, but starting out with culinary programs, butchery programs who have more independence and can sometimes pay a higher price point, as well as catering operations, as entry points that have a bit more flexibility before getting into the student cafeterias and places that are a bit more tight on pricing. And one celebration is that, at least from the conversations we did have, Gordon Food Services is able to support us. We're hoping that we'll have some distribution support there. And a current challenge, just for those of you who do any work with beef, is that Cisco currently can't touch provincial beef for insurance reasons. So there's a big, relates a bit to Wolfgang and Gap, and that is the insurance requirements as you get larger and larger tend to force out small producers. There's just not an ability to meet those standards. So we're really getting creative on how we can prove, say, becoming HACCP certified as a provincial producer without becoming a federal meat processing plant, which is not affordable for the scale that they're at. And to really, where can we push that bar, and where can we get those larger corporate players to support us, or can we be successful without needing to play the full game, so to speak? Can we get in with smaller distributors and still become viable long term?
Gosh, that's a lot of barriers there. Well done for navigating all of those things. I know one of the things that we've talked about with Emily and Owen and our UBCO advisory group is how can one aggregator or packer hold the certification on behalf of others? To what extent is that possible? And there's a lot to that, I think. Marita, I wanted to give you the chance to jump in, and David, if you need to jump off before we're moving into the participant questions, please feel free to do so, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Liz. I'll be out in 5 or 6 minutes. But
Okay.
yeah, it's been great and appreciate all your questions.
So thank you. And I'm just going to start because I didn't answer the previous question just about the relationships, or if there's any standards. And I wanted to mention, one of the things I didn't mention at the beginning was I was a certified organic grower for 4 years, and I worked with the Senator Organics aggregation. So similar to Wolfgang. So just recognizing that there's so many different types of sort of aggregation hubs out there. And that worked really well. And sort of having a place where we could just sell wholesale our organic produce to Senator Organics was a blessing, and worked really well for us. And of course we had to be certified organic. Just wanted to mention with the way that we work at Lush Valley, in terms of standards, what's really come forward is that, like, the values piece and the relationships piece. So essentially farmers that worked with us on the studies, whether it was the study that we did with the Coalition to End Homelessness, or the study that we did through Ministry of Ag on the K-12 aggregation project, what we found is that those were farmers that wanted to contribute to food security, to alleviating food insecurity in our community. And so that's been really interesting, because that's basically continued to be the types of farmers that we work with. So it's not necessarily, although we actually do have a lot of certified organic growers, because it just happens to also be, part of the values. We do work with about 20 farms, and, I would say a third to a half are certified organic. But those values around wanting to really contribute to ending food insecurity in our community have been the relationships. And that's kind of how we've, how our, we don't have a formalized process, but that's been how that has worked. So just answering that previous question. And then moving to this question. So yeah, this question's got a lot of pieces to it. So I think in terms of financial challenges, of course, there's financial challenges because right now, what we've done with our producers is we've had, I guess, the privilege and the opportunity to basically pay what they want, which does, I'm not sure that that's going to continue in the long term, but we've been able to work with different producers and pay kind of what they normally would ask for in a market situation. We've been able to pay that. And the reason that we've been able to do that again is because we are able to fundraise and we are able with our charitable status to have grant opportunities and that kind of thing. So again, going back to talking about the values, really wanting farmers to feel supported. So that's been an advantage, but that can be and will probably in the future become a challenge. How do we standardize what we'll pay for, similar product? We haven't had to cross that bridge yet. I think just challenges too is, so on the market side in terms of so we partner right now, we're partnered with about 20 different organizations. So for example, Wache Friendship Center is one of our partner, Comox First Nation is one of our partner, Comox Valley Family Services is one of our partners, and then Indigenous Education is one of our partners. Some of those partners have the ability to pay for the service and some do not. And one of the financial challenges is not as if we're being paid per pound of X, it's that we're getting thrown a chunk of money when they have a chunk of money come through. So like Better at Home just gave us $6,000 to support a project. Wache will, when they have money for food programs, will write us a check for $5,000 or $10,000. Same with Indigenous Education. But our challenge is that it's not a linear, it's very hard to plan because we don't know exactly what's coming when. We also, I would say one of the ways we're trying to deal with it again is just having a number of revenue streams. So with BC Housing, we have an actual service contract. So that's very different than dealing with other partners that may have funds come in and be able to pay for the service. The service contract, obviously, we know what we're being paid and for what service. So that's very helpful. And then we have a community, we have community good food boxes, for example, where that is paid for. So we know kind of what we're getting, but we're using Local Line as our online ordering system. And we'll probably be moving to more of a subscription because right now it's, again, people can order week to week. So that means that it's hard to just, sorry, and the question just got moved out of my screen. Hold on here. So yeah, so there can be some ups and downs. The quality question, again, so there's a price point. So our largest product is the Good Food Box. And so there's a price point on that. So I think that helps to take care of the quality issue. So when we have things that come in at different quality, we make sure that every box is at the same value. So we're able to make sure at least that the quality remains stable for the end customer or client in that way. Institutional sales, and this has been a hard nut for us to crack. We would love to be doing more institutional sales. Like right now, we are, as I said, we have a small contract with BC Housing. We are working with the K-12 schools, but that's through Indigenous Education. We are supporting salad bar programs as well. We've tried to work with long-term care facilities, and it's really hard to get the price point right at what, like, so we have our charitable work where we're able to use grants to support, and then we have other social enterprise elements. And we're definitely wanting to do more institutional sales, but it's been a hard nut for us to crack to get the price point where they want it and to compete with other distributors. So we're still working on it.
Thank you. Wolfgang, I see you nodding. And I know that you have spoken to some of the financial challenges, certainly as it relates to our competing with the global food system. Anything else come to mind? Yeah.
Just really short. If it's a privately run school or institution or long-term care facility, then they are in control over how much they want to spend. But if it's got anything to do with the government, I believe the rate was like $5.68 per person per day. Like, it was very brutal. When I was with the Waterloo Regional Food Roundtable, that was a constant topic. How do you get these outfits to accept that they should be spending $10 a day on a person for food. No, they won't. That's what the government gives them, and that's all they provide.
I'm
There
writing
was
that.
no room for negotiating or talk. That's just how it is.
Yeah, I'm writing that
The
one down.
the number I mentioned is most likely wrong, but it was a brutally low number of dollars that they spent per person in their facility.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a big one. That's such a big one. I think that translates to our maybe to our next conversation as well, about these really big systems level barriers, the value of food, the value of people, what we're feeding people. Yeah, big topics. Do we have any questions? We're nearing the end of our time. And so I think what I might do is combine our last two questions, although I think that all of our panelists have really beautifully weaved all of these pieces into their responses as we've gone along, which is great. Any questions from our participants, from our audience on this topic of financial challenges? Or even what Marita was sharing about their fit of farmers, how they're working with, and sorry for forgetting to, yeah. Stacy, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here. I'm with the ministry. You'll hear from me in a minute. But I just have a question for those who spoke. For anyone who is a panelist, I would love to hear, if you look around at your colleagues or others who might be selling to institutions, what examples of success do you see when you look around at other businesses who have institutions that they're selling to? Because I think that in itself is something, you know, it's one thing to kind of like bang your head against the wall as an individual, but I'm so curious if in any of your networks you've looked to others to say, okay, they seem to be succeeding in an institutional market and what's going on there. Just curious if anything comes to mind from the panelists.
Go ahead, Marita. Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah. Stacy, I really appreciate that, because it's so interesting. So as Lush Valley is one of 8 island, they're called island food hubs. So like within VHA, which is the Vancouver Island Health Authority. And there's lots of different models. So each community seems to have its different, model of what this looks like. And the Tofino Ukiulit Culinary Guild is one that's been running a long time before the word hub really became this buzzword. And so what they've been able to do is really create quite a robust system. So it's interesting because, just to give the lay of the land for people that don't know Tofino and Ukiulit, there's almost no space to grow food there. But what they've been able to do is bring in local food from across the island, bring it into the community, and then be kind of a one-stop shop for what started as restaurants, really started as a culinary guild, and now has really built to different organizations and institutions. And that has a specific sort of geographic disadvantage that they were able to create as an advantage, to be really that one-stop shop for local for local food. And because it's such a big tourist destination, it's been highly successful. So again, like seeing that model in that particular type of community where there's no local farm. So we can't really do the same thing in the Comox Valley because people have all kinds of relationships with farmers, but we don't want to kind of interrupt. We want to make it easier. We don't want to be in a situation where it's like we're helping, but people don't really need the help, so we don't want to interrupt what already exists. But there isn't that system. There's no opportunity for that direct sale farmer. So they've been really successful. And so I think looking at communities that are don't have as many growers in them, they're more rural or remote, that seems like that model's really worked. And then speaking again to the Saanich Organics models, which is another one that had really been going before this sort of hub buzzword came around, is that farm. It's the same as Wolfgang's model, but a smaller scale. So it's really a farmer led, where there's a collaborative of growers that where there's some infrastructure on one of the farms, and they can do that kind of institutional, larger scale aggregation distribution. They have the infrastructure on farm. And then we'll have, there's a number of other hubs on the island that are more focused on, again, or that are just being built. So like in the South Island and in Cowichan, that will be more on the processing side. And so yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. In Cowichan, so Cowichan Green community has, they have the cow op. Cowichan, yeah, you probably know about, I see you nodding your head, Stacey, and they were one of the first to really look at the online system, so the online sales system, and doing, and it's not necessarily institutions, although they may now be doing some institutions, but it was creating an online market for the South Island, and they were, I think, one of the first, at least in our region, to be doing that. So those are some examples.
Thank you. That's a great question. Wolfgang, I wonder if you have any insight there, the examples of success where hubs are selling into institutions or businesses like yourself selling into institutions. I know that you mentioned at the top that the challenge with institutions in terms of these service contracts, food.
In Ontario, nobody that I know of has been doing that for a long time. And a few years ago, it kind of started a little bit, but that kind of faded away. And we are not doing any, not even restaurants, like, or a wee little bit of restaurant, but like maybe, I don't know, not even 2% of our sales go into restaurants and 0 into institutions.
Okay, interesting. It is definitely a tough nut to crack that so many people are experiencing on so many levels, those logistic level barriers and then these systems level barriers. So, yeah. And that's why we are wanting to have these conversations. We have a limited amount of time left. I know, Marita, you have to jump off a bit earlier. So I thought I would just give each of you the opportunity. I know I sent you a number of questions ahead of our conversation today. And we've, like I mentioned, you have really weaved the cost, the logistics, the values, the quality control, the examples of how you're working with farmers. But I wonder if there's anything else that feels unsaid, anything else that you think would be worth us knowing, project partners who are working with UBC Okanagan, Emily, who's our farmer aggregator, that you think might be helpful as we continue to pursue this institutional local food procurement and expand that to even more institutions in our region. Just to put you on the spot.
Get Cisco or GFS to carry organic. They have a foot in the door, but the problem is these large distribution warehouses, again, have their own sets of challenges. It's unbelievable what you can see, what goes on in some of the warehouses. Sometimes it's not what the ownership wants, but it is a fact. And if they have an organic carrot and if they have a conventional carrots, they have computer systems that are supposed to give locations, and it gets picked by location, and it's almost too much already for some of these places. We were approached by Cisco and GFS about working an organic supply and so on, but it never really went anywhere. Not by our choice. We engage in any conversation. So they reach out, that means it's on their horizon, but they don't seem to handle that ball.
Yeah, thanks, Wolfgang. Rita, is there anything else?
Yeah, I mean, we need to really break down barriers. So one of the frustrations has been, there's kind of the Ministry of Ag, and I know Stacey, model of what a hub is and what aggregation looks like and what's included and what's not included in institutions versus this and that. And there is a huge opportunity to work with charitable organizations that are running food programs that have budgets to purchase food. But the charitable sector is never considered in the business model. Whenever I bring it up, it's kind of like, oh, we can't include that in the business model because, because we have to raise funds through grants and we have to do that. But look, like businesses are the same. They have to go through, they might fail, like they have to sell. So it's like the charitable model is also a type of business model. And we need to break down barriers because we have complex issues to deal with. We want to make sure that farmers can continue to actually grow food because we're dealing with climate change and increasing emergencies. We need to have resilient local food systems, and people also need to have access to healthy food. We know the long-term health implications are dire when people are dealing with food security on a regular basis, and that costs our system a great amount, but we won't look, so much of it is not looking further down the road at what the costs of continuing to do what we're doing are over the long term. So I think we need to break down barriers, business and nonprofit. We need to be able to work together. We have complex issues to deal with. We need complex organizations that can take the best of the business world, best of the nonprofit, best of government, and actually work together. Because we're not going to be able to solve these complex issues if we don't look at those types of collaborations. And so, my frustration has been, doing these reports, and then, we're just like out of sheer, I feel like it's out of just sheer determination. We bought a building. We didn't have a grant. We didn't have anything. We just fundraised and we did it. But, we're small potatoes, and we just keep, bumping our heads up against these sort of institutional barriers. And yeah, we just need some better models for collaboration, and we could do this. I think we could support, our local growers better, and we could figure out how to see the charitable sector as another market. So yeah, that's all.
Just that. Okay. No big deal. I really appreciate that perspective because Land to Table is in this kind of middle of the community situation as a regional food system network where we are looking to create solutions. And it's so easy to get siloed into this is what business does, this is what the charitable sector does, and neither the two shall meet. So yeah, I appreciate that. And I know Emily and I were talking about how community infrastructure can support local food systems alongside business as well. Great segue also to Stacy and Renoir. Maybe you can stop spotlighting us. I know we're going to say goodbye to Marita shortly. Stacy Irwin is with Feedbc. She's just going to share a little bit about Feedbc programs. Before I hand it over, in case folks have to jump off before we wrap up, thank you, Wolfgang and Marita, so much. This has been super valuable, and Emily has just echoed that in the chat. Yeah, she'll have to watch the recording a few times to absorb it all. There was a lot of detail in here. We really appreciate your perspectives, and I love how well your different perspectives complemented each other. So Stacy, why don't we hand it over to you and you can share a little bit about Feedbc.
Great. Well, hi all. I've been listening very, just excited to hear these conversations. One of the reasons I threw the question out that I did is because, we can laundry list all of the challenges that we know exist in these markets. It's not an easy time to be a producer. Wolfgang, I'm a fellow Ontarian. My parents are organic dairy farmers, and I've been to your farm actually as an undergrad student at Guelph going on an organic farm tour. So great to see you here. Yeah, I mean, the networks around food kind of go across this country. So it's just great to have this opportunity to learn from you again. I am one of two value chain specialists that the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries has recently brought on as of last year to support Feedbc, which I don't know how many of you know about this program that the ministry is running, but its essence is to try and encourage more BC food and beverages going into BC institutions and working on that, what we know is a very complex challenge in a complex market. Food services and institutions is a very complex market, but the ministry is working on this in a number of different ways. And so my colleague Christina Waters is on this call as well. And there's 5 of us that are full-time working to support the Feedbc mandate in a variety of approaches. On the demand building side, I think Wolfgang touched on a number of really important points, right? Like it's one thing to talk about values, it's another thing to really get all of those who make food purchase decisions at the institutional level to be on the same page. And I think that quote about, if I'm not dealing with a chef, if I'm dealing with someone who doesn't want to be dealing with me because the values aren't aligned here around what we're doing, that's a really tough thing for a producer processor to be doing. So part of what Feedbc is trying to do is raise the profile, raise the conversation through partnerships, through working on procurement language with institutions, particularly in BC with our health authorities and our post-secondaries, to get all of those sort of ancillary services, procurement services, those who might not necessarily be super invested in what local food means personally, but get them having that conversation around, how do we care about this in a real way? How do we build it into our procurement and build the incentives for then our food service partners to also be really taking seriously local food? And that then trickles down to that level of the Cisco's and the Gordon Food Services and the food service suppliers that then have more incentive because their customers are asking for this type of, a local product, an organic product, something that's coming from the province. So really we're working on that demand side, and part of our value chain work is understanding what are those buyers asking for? What do they want to see come locally? And, in my mind, I think about this as local plus. It's not enough to just be local. It's also like, what is the value that that product is bringing? Is it in this time of supply chain disruption that there's a distribution system that could be a bit more resilient because it's a bit closer to an institution, and that is compelling, especially after the last couple of years of a lot of disruption? Is it that a product is labor saving because the way that it's coming is somehow easier in a kitchen to process? Things like that, in addition to just being local, are what institutions are looking at and more receptive to having a conversation about, because we know price point is a major barrier in a lot of ways, but there are pockets of opportunity, especially with self-operated institutions. So we're really working on sort of mapping out that landscape and understanding from having that kind of demand side conversation, where is their flexibility, where is their interest, where is their receptiveness, and then taking that information and moving it towards our producers and processors to say, hey, in this area, we know that there's a little bit more flexibility, or there's an opportunity. We're hearing a strong interest in a product. Is there interest in doing this specific product? And some of the things that we're sort of able to support as the ministry is sharing information about how to sell to institutions. So we have quite a robust network of relationships with institutional buyers at this point, especially healthcare and post-secondaries. And so able to direct you to, okay, who should you be talking to if you want to get into this market, if you can't find the right person to be speaking with. We're working really closely with GFS and Cisco. And I think, Wolfgang, to your point about, sometimes these conversations get started and the ball gets dropped. These are huge companies that have lots of staff, right? And there's turnover and movement, and sometimes the conversation falls off. And one of my roles is just to kind of be that nudge. So I have recurring meetings with both of them. Hey, what's going on with local? Hey, what kind of local products are you bringing in? Hey, what are you, do you need any help connecting to or seeing anybody else? And it's really like, it feels funny to say that that's a service, but just to have that regular touch point where someone is asking them, what's going on with your local catalog? Where are you bringing in new products? Do you need help finding something? Can we work with you? Like, it is just that kind of squeaky wheel. And I think that, all of these things work together to kind of elevate that people care about local, that customers care about local, and find opportunities that are existing within the current food service structure, right? Because there's a reason that these food services have been set up the way they have, to save time, to save cost. And understanding that system and being able to position yourself as adding value within it is sometimes a lot more feasible than trying to recreate the system. So we're also hosting events with Feedbc. So we just did a pitch and plate event that my colleague Christina on this call was instrumental in, getting products in front of institutions, because sometimes the folks making decisions about food don't even know what's available locally. And so getting some of that inspiration and like, oh, this is a great product, could we work on something that's manageable in food service, has been just a great opportunity for folks that might not be thinking about this in food service procurement to start thinking what might be a little bit more possible outside the box of how they're procuring. And also with food hubs, as we've mentioned, there's a food hub conversation in the ministry, and the ministry is supporting food hubs work. Those are quite nascent, but the hope is that there will be sort of back and forth, and it's already started more conversations, at least regionally, with food hubs and then the institutions in those areas about what institutions want to buy, feeding that into some of the businesses that are, you know, hosted or housed in the food hubs as they think about product development and value added products that might go into institutions where there's more opportunity. So a lot of different things going on. This is a new service, Value Chain Innovation Service, that BC has launched. It's in its initial days, and we're really working with buyers to try and drive, okay, what do they want to see? And then taking that to industry and finding ways to make more connections and to be a bit of that recurring check-in point to make sure the conversations don't fall off on the institutional buyer side. So if you have any interest in connecting or you want to talk about opportunities regionally, please do email me. I can put my email in the chat. Christine, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that while you're here.
No, thank you, Stacey. Well put. Yes, I'm Christina Waters with the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries. And primarily what I've been focusing on is post-secondary institutions. So I'm happy to report that we have 20 public partner post-secondary institutions that have partnered with Feedbc to help shift towards about a 30% target, kind of a minimum target of 30% for their procurement to be locally sourced. And we also have 6 health authorities on board as well. So it's been a really active and exciting year, and we're up for the challenge of continuing to help remove those barriers for everyone. I also want to thank everyone for sharing your insight. It's been a wealth of knowledge for us, and we love these circles, Liz. The last one was so informative, took a lot of notes, and this one was just as informative. So thank you, and thank you, Stacey, for sharing Feedbc.
Yeah, thank you for closing that off and you know, talking about those barriers and the support that you're offering. UBC is receiving some of that support as well in the project that we've been working on with them over the last year, which is awesome. Gary, do you want to, so Gary's with the manager for food services at UBCO, anything that you want to share or ask or standing out for you?
Yeah, really. I mean, it's somebody brought up earlier, you know, that it can seem like there's endless barriers, and to agree, that's right. It's like anything, you know, until there's momentum, it can be a difficult thing. And I will say that we're lucky to, you know, through Mary and meeting Liz and you know, sometimes it is luck, right? Honestly, that you know, that there's the different groups looking to do something at the same time that are complementary. And we, I believe it was David earlier who brought up, you know, working with food services that were contracted out. And so even if, you know, this had come our way, Liz, you know, 4 years ago, we wouldn't have been in a spot to do that because it was 2019 that we brought food services in-house. So sometimes you know, things just do work out like that. But I know through speaking with other schools and other managers and directors in my similar position, you know, one of the biggest things is having that one-stop shop that you can go to, which is whether, you know, it's like land to table calling that, but the hub idea, and where that's that central purchasing from. I know cost has come up a couple times, and it is important. But it's also, but we look at costs the same way, you know, David had brought it up where, yep, there are certain things that are, you know, that we're paying more for, and that can get, and that's fine when it's local, you know, that can get absorbed into what else we're purchasing and kind of get all averaged out. So, you know, I think a lot of schools are starting not to look exclusively at the bottom line. There are many things that go to food services, and we talked about old ideas as well. And one of them is, oh, food cost, and not, okay, how are we contributing to our community? What is the climate action? Sorry, what is the, you know, what is the climate cost of the food that we're using? And these are all things that all institutions are looking at. So, and with that, you know, willing to pay more for food that addresses other concerns. So just keeping an open mind and knowing that, yes, it's about cost, but cost is more than dollars and cents. There's the greater cost as well.
Yeah, and certainly our academic institutions have the opportunity to lead the way, I think, in demonstrating why those costs are those other costs are important. And you're right, we have been lucky, like the group at UBCO with ICER, with Land to Table and our network of farmers has been a fantastic, supportive, enthusiastic group to work with. So, things have gone smoothly in that sense. We all enjoy each other's company and can have really good conversations. Stacey, was there one more thing? And then I'm just going to close us off here really quick.
Yes, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, we have just launched Feedbc's directory. So as of last week, it is now a live directory. And this is a resource. I know that Gary just mentioned one-stop shop, right? Where are local products? Where do we find out about them? What's available in the province? Who's selling what? We have heard this as a ministry for the last several years, coming from institutional buyers, like just help us understand what's coming from BC where in our region. And so the ministry has created a product that is a free resource for producers and processors to post products on, with the goal of this being hopefully the one-stop shop that institutions can turn to and look at what's coming from BC, and be able to start some of those conversations directly. And I can link that information it's now a live website. We're really excited about it. I'll link it in the chat. But that is another tool that we're trying to support to make it easier, because as we know, as Wolfgang had pointed out about Cisco and GFS and distribution and it being challenging to get products listed, part of what drives that listing is when a buyer says, hey, there's a product that I'm aware of, would you carry it? I'd like to see that. I'd like to be able to purchase it. That's part of what drives a distributor being willing to have the conversation about taking something on in their already mature inventory. So we're hoping that this resource, if there are products posted and buyers can see, okay, I didn't know that there was this option in my own sort of region, that can drive some of the conversation as well. So I'll link that in the chat.
Yeah,
Stacey, I just dropped
perfect.
it.
Christina beat me to it. So yeah, there's our directory. Please do look at it. And please, if you're a producer or processor on this call, please consider listing your products on there as well. We're hoping to really build that resource out.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I would love to hear from everyone who is remaining on the call. If you want to add in the chat really quickly, what is one or two things that are standing out most for you from this conversation? Something that you're walking away thinking about, or a valuable tidbit, or something that you hadn't really thought about before. I know for me, we've been able to pull Marita into a couple of different conversations that Land to Table has hosted. And I speaking as a food system network, semi-charitable organization, I appreciate that idea of connecting sectors in order to get more local food to our local markets, like institutions. So that's something that I'm certainly walking away with. But yeah, if you want to add that in the chat before we sign off, that would be great. It helps us have a little bit of feedback as well. Thank you, Wolfgang, to our remaining panelists. Thanks so much for your time and your insight today, and Marita and David as well, and Emily for providing some context that we're working within and the work that you're doing. And to everyone who took the time to join us, we really appreciate it. And we are hosting our final Learning Circle session on April 20th. I believe it's 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And that conversation will be kind of pulling up to a higher level, looking at the systems, or the holistic systems aspects, the systems level barriers, issues, challenges, opportunities around institutional local food procurement. And today's session was a great segue, because certainly all of our panelists touched on some of those higher level systems issues. So yeah, thank you again. We're sending you off 4 minutes early. Whew.
Thank you to all. And Stacey was explaining about the customers asking Cisco to carry stuff. That's pulling the rope. We have been talking all these 2 hours about pushing it. Figure out how to pull the rope instead of push it.
And I would just add that the value chain service is exactly that. You know, pushing it is a commodity-based approach. It's saying, hey, I've got carrots, who wants carrots? And the hope in this market with this value chain service that we're working on is, hey, this is what institutions are asking for. This is where there's real interest and demand in particular product categories and particular specifications of a type of product. I've been doing a lot of work right now through surveys and conversations saying, okay, I hear you want a cookie batter. What specs do you want? What's the case size? What's the pack size? What is the ingredient deck? Okay, you want BC produce, you want frozen produce. What's the pack size? What's the spec size? And so we're really hoping to take that granular level of what is a chef, what's a food service executive telling us they would be more willing to purchase from BC because they either can't find their product or they can't find a product in the spec that they want. Where are the more compelling products that if they could be produced or tweaked and made available locally, there would be real traction in getting those products that could compete, in ways that the existing incumbent products can't, and taking that to industry, because exactly that, it's the difference between pulling a product that there's real demand for into an institution versus trying to push something where there's lukewarm interest in what's already sort of potentially fulfilled by an existing contract. So we're hoping, it's not going to be every product, it's not going to be every institution, but there's windows of opportunity anywhere. And I think that the ministry is really hoping to expose and make that information more known to those who can kind of come together around specific opportunities.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think, community organizations hopefully can help jump in and make that information even more available. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you April 20th.